Welcome, everybody. We are super excited to talk with the beautiful Celia and Dr. Molly to talk about unlocking your best sex life. I just want to intro these wonderful women. So, Celia Chen is a chief marketing officer for wellness brands and a health optimization coach. And Dr. Molly Maloof is a longevity physician, author of The Spark Factor, and founder of the Adamo Bioscience. And they'll definitely go over more of this when we start talking, but I do want to start off today by sharing a very short story about how Joy Wellness and Blokes Wellness, our brother brand, came about. So, our founders, Josh and Katie Whalen, were actually struggling with their hormones while they were trying to conceive children, and they both had extremely low libido. And they both found their health again by getting their labs done, optimizing with peptides, HRT, and TRT, and now have the best sex and marriage ever. I
Aw.
had them on here, but that is definitely one of the top pillars for Joy and Blokes, and we're just super excited to talk about it today. So I'll throw it over to Celia and Dr. Molly.
Hi.
Hi, Riley. We are so excited to be here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I'm so excited because I get to have a chat this morning with my dear friend, Dr. Molly Maloof, and this is our favorite thing to talk about ever.
It's
And
true.
our hope today, and we can talk for hours, but we only have about like 35 minutes to get into this conversation, then we're going to open it up to questions. So I would encourage all of you as we go through these topics to drop questions into the chat. Riley will, be kind of monitoring that, and we can kind of tackle that at the very end. But our hope today is to really empower all of you to take steps towards having an amazing sex life, but to just start, to just, from wherever you are on your journey, let's meet this with some curiosity and let's have some fun today. So I'd like to start with an inspiring quote from your book. So if you haven't read this book, The Spark Factor, it's amazing. Molly's really, I think, arguably one of the OG female biohackers. She really looks at longevity and female longevity in a new way. And I want to start with this quote because it really resonated with me. So Molly writes, as women, our sexuality is one of our greatest sources of power. It is a wellspring of energy that we can tap into if we learn how to sense and integrate it into the entirety of our being. Okay, that sounds amazing, but just how do we do that? I think maybe before we start diving into all the ways to optimize our sex life, maybe we should start with us. We should start with women. I think a lot of the times when we are, speaking to our doctors or our practitioners, they all say, "Oh, it's in your head," right? So, how do we address the biological factors, the real physical kind of ailments and challenges that affect us getting into the mood and really being able to tap into both our arousal and pleasure?
Well, I was just speaking about this before the women joined us for this meeting, but one of the things that I wanted to really share was that you got to think about your libido kind of like a vital sign. And, it is a part of your vital force. So we have hormones for a reason. We are biological imperative. Whether you have kids or not, I don't care. It's more about you need to understand why your body has certain programming. And so your body's fundamental baseline programming is to survive and reproduce, which means you basically need to find substrates to run your energetic systems to have an energy metabolism. So that's where I spent most of my career is food and metabolism. But then I realized that I was missing a really big piece of the puzzle, which is human relationships and human connection. This is a fundamental facet of being a human and being a woman or hormones are central to our capacity to have a libido. So I work with women, mostly ages like 30s to 60s, and I look at their hormones first and foremost if they have libido issues. And I've almost always had a pretty high libido, and it wasn't until last year, it was actually this January, where I had low testosterone for the first time. And I had been eating vegetarian for 4 months because of a relationship that I was in. I wasn't lifting weights. And I basically completely changed my lifestyle after moving in with someone. And I saw my testosterone levels completely tank. And obviously, it
Wow.
wasn't particularly healthy relationship. So I also saw my cortisol levels drop. And so low cortisol, low testosterone, those can just completely zap your vital force. But then there's a lot of women who are probably in this talk right now who are going through or in the midst of entering perimenopause or menopause.
Yeah.
And we are experiencing a massive revolution of hormone education for for everyone. And I even went to an event.
Amen.
I mean, amen. Thank God it's happening. But there's still a lot of pushback, right? There's a lot of people that are looking at this as, I mean, I literally interviewed for a license in Wyoming recently, and no joke, the Wyoming licensing board said, "You don't prescribe hormones, do you?" And it was almost like I had to like I said, "Well, I'm learning." I basically told them I'm learning about them. And it's like, no, of course I prescribe. But it was crazy that mainstream medicine in both the United States and the UK is looking at hormones as a problem when realistically, I think we're going to be seeing it in the next 20 years, it's going to be a completely different worldview because we're realizing the
And
science
it's
is fundamentally supporting hormones for our libido, our bone health, our brain health, our heart health, our skin health. And it's what gives us a sense of vitality.
thank God we have this menopause movement, kind of the Gen Xers who are saying, like, enough with this. We demand, you know, um, healthcare. But there's been so much education to have to like turn around the stigma around and then really the misinformation around hormones. I read this crazy statistic that there was one menopause expert for every 34,000 women in the US, right? So you think about
Yeah.
telemedicine platforms like Joy coming in and saying, okay, we need to give women accessible health care. A primary part of that is assessing our hormones and being able to supplement where needed so that we can operate at an optimal level. And I know that that's a lot of what you talk about. Like a lot of the issues that people are experiencing overall with their overall health are going to impact their sexual health. And you can't really separate, health
Oh,
from sexual health. What are some of the other like common deficiencies and health issues that you're seeing in your concierge practice and with your students?
I mean, metabolic dysfunction is pretty widespread and even in young, healthy looking people. So people don't realize this, but there's actually a lot of people going on semaglutide for weight loss and they're noticing improvements in their libido. And it's
Mhm.
because their blood sugar metabolism is improving. And if you have, by the way, I'm speaking from a lot of personal experience. Like in 2014, I had prediabetes. I was literally at a fasting glucose of 100. And so
Me
I,
too.
I mean, this was
Me
you
too.
10 years
You
ago,
helped
right?
me, you helped me manage my prediabetes. And so we are two examples of people who eat healthy and exercise and try to do all the things, although we have, some stress in our lives because of
Sure.
how we live and run around. But, we just want to tell everyone like it's very, very common for
Yes.
people to hit their late 30s, early 40s. For me, it was my late 40s where all of a sudden you're becoming more insulin resistant and you don't have resilience, you don't have vitality, and all of
Yeah.
a sudden you feel like crap. And hey, the first thing to go is forget about libido, forget about all the extras. You're kind of like living in fight or flight.
Yeah. I mean, look, I have a client who's 42 going through perimenopause. Her cortisol levels are completely flat. She has low testosterone. She has mild, like subclinical hypothyroidism. She's just completely depleted. And she's a mom, and her dad got sick last year. And so the reality is that a lot of women, especially moms out there, are putting almost everybody above their own health.
Yeah.
And you actually have to be a serious advocate for yourself because even if you go to a company like Joy, for example, to get a prescription of hormones, it's so important for you to become really in tune with how you feel because you are going to be able to take that information and actually tailor your medicines to your body. So I always teach all my clients, you need to track your hormones, you need to track your blood labs. You can even get home hormone testing kits now. But I also really do recommend tracking your symptoms. So one of my friends, Alicia Robbins, is like a world-class perimenopause expert in Connecticut, and she doses and treats her women based on their symptoms primarily. So a lot of hormone management
Yeah.
and libido management and like just understanding your body is first based on like what are your total symptoms. So in my practice, I really try to apply this concept called scientific wellness. And basically, you're taking your symptoms, which is your qualitative history, and then you're taking your objective measures, And this would be things like laboratory testing and Oura Ring and continuous glucose monitoring. And then you're combining that to figure out what are my systems that are not functioning optimally. And then how do I support those systems? And I first learned a lot about this through a doctor, Richard Lee, who was one of my mentors. And I worked at a company, no joke, at least 8 years ago called GeneSolve. And we were doing personalized medicine using genetics and labs and history to create custom compounded hormones and supplements for people. And it was a really, honestly, very expensive, time consuming, and we didn't have the technology we have today. But it was
Yeah.
where I really first started to understand, holy crap, I was not taught this in medical school. I was not taught the relationship between hormones and libido, hormones and bone health, hormones and brain health. And
Yeah.
so it really made me a lot less afraid of these. But there are a lot of women out there that are probably worried, what if I have cancer? The one thing I would say to women is, everybody, so your body will create mutated cells on occasion. And if you have a healthy immune system, your body should be able to repair and reverse those genetic mutations. There's now a company called Cancer Check Labs that I'm affiliated with, and they can actually detect cancer at the very earliest stages, stage 0. So
Mhm.
I use this on all my clients now. It's a little bit too accurate, which is the one downside of it. But if you are worried about hormones and cancer, you can always actually see if your body has any cancer cells floating around. And in that case, you can, there's a lot of research that I've been doing with, for example, I went and spoke at the A4M Female Health Conference, and there's a lot of doctors that are treating breast cancer and finding that this idea that hormones cause breast cancer isn't necessarily sound.
Yeah.
And that this, there are a lot of downsides, and if there's anyone in the audience who wants this presentation, I can share it with them. But it's an entire presentation on post breast cancer care, and some doctors are actually using hormones post breast cancer care.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I have a good friend who's an excellent OBGYN. We just did an event together, Dr. Suzanne Gilbert-Lenz, and she's a breast cancer survivor and she's on hormones. And
right,
she reminds us that we really have to look at the cost benefit analysis of anything that you're going to do, right? And the risks. And it's a conversation that every woman deserves, right? HRT might not be right for everyone, but every woman deserves to have the conversation with
sure,
either a joint practitioner, their doctor, their OBGYN. I mean, I don't know if your GP knows enough about menopause, but most women die of heart disease, even the ones that have breast cancer. So when we talk about
yes,
preventative, right? But if we're going back to kind of this idea of like vitality that you and I always talk about, right? Like sex being this life force, the things and understanding fundamentally what energy is to begin with, right? With metabolism, but it
yeah,
shows up as fatigue. It shows up as aches and pains. It shows up as low arousal. It shows up in a lot of ways where you just don't have enough in the tank to be able to either perform optimally or to be able to really, um, strive for what we want, which is for us, what we're talking about today. It's like healthy libido, right? Healthy relationships, more pleasure, more communication. I want to kind of go past some of the physical and go into the mental and the spiritual, right? So what I love about your work, Molly, is that it's not just like you don't think just like a doctor where you're like, okay, I'm going to go through your symptoms first, but so many of them are actually emotional, mental, and maybe spiritual in a way of
yeah,
like how we were raised to think about sex, how much we know about our bodies. So beyond the like pelvic floor issues and the
sure.
literal physical things that we can address, what are some of the psychological factors that play into this, and how do they become a barrier for us for pleasure?
Well, as a woman who was raised extremely Christian in my family, very, I went to a very Christian grade school. I know how much internalized shame can affect a woman's self-confidence around her sexuality. And there's just an enormous amount of shame in the world around sex. And we live in one of the weirdest countries in the world because we both have way more equality than a lot of the world, but we
Mhm.
also have our sexuality is basically it's all over the media nonstop, where being hypersexualized is considered to be an asset, and yet culturally we also tend to shame women who have a high libido or women who have a sex drive. And so it's both you're expected to be sexy, but you're not. And unfortunately, a lot of young women are really confused about how they're supposed to behave, how they're supposed to act.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of sort of internalized shame around even being in touch with what turns you on. There's certainly I wouldn't say that all men, but some men have challenges with female sexuality. An empowered, a woman who's very empowered with her sexuality can be intimidating to some men. So that can be part of the challenge as well. Relationships are one the biggest drivers of psychosomatic sexual dysfunction, which is sexual dysfunction not secondary to an organic cause, are relationship problems, mood disorders, and trauma. And so there's enormous levels of anxiety and depression in our country, which
Yeah.
hugely affect sexual function, of which a lot of women treat with SSRIs. And we know that SSRIs have sexual side effects.
Mm.
On top of that, we do not get really, we don't grow up necessarily being raised with life skills around relationships. That's not taught in school. How to be a good partner, how to be a good wife, how to be a good mother. Like this is not taught to people in schools. And so you basically get your imprinting on what this looks like from your parents. So most people are walking around with a um, sort of template of what a relationship should look like based on how they were raised. And as you guys probably know, there's a lot of relationship dysfunction in our parents' generation that has never been fully addressed because at least I mean I've got wonderful parents, but they're not the people that are going to go get like a therapist if they have an issue.
Yeah.
You
My
know?
family is the same, grew up, kind of in a religious family. I was definitely the rebellious one in the
Sure.
family. And but it's this idea of being this willful little girl, right? That turns into more of a confident woman where, your body autonomy is so important, we both advocate, like I'm a health optimization coach and you're obviously a longevity physician and sexual wellness expert, but like we have this conversation a lot where we want women to just have an awareness of their bodies. So from the, okay, what's not feeling great, but also what feels really great, right? So the other end of the spectrum is not just identifying with our body when something is going wrong, but really being able to identify when things feel amazing and giving ourselves permission to, feel pleasure, receive, and kind of bask in the joy of when the systems are operating at a great level. You have
Yeah.
energy in the tank, you have that glow, and in one of the podcasts I listened to, I think it was with you and Dr. Casey Means, and you were talking about this kind of modern epidemic of stress and how it really affects women and our nervous systems,
Yeah.
and that our bodies evolved to keep us alive, right? So it's always going to prioritize
Yeah.
survival. So if you
Yeah.
live in this state of fight or flight, you're kind of always in survival mode. It's going to kind of shut down what they consider to be like the non-essential functions. Maybe digestion gets affected, your hair starts to grow less, right? But pleasure and libido and arousal are kind of like the extras. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the importance of stress management, feeling safe for women's both kind of physical but also like emotional and mental health, and when we start talking about how that affects our sex life?
Sure. So one of the things that I want to, and first of all, I apologize for briefly laughing. I was thinking about this Ali Wong comedy about her sexual, like she's just on fire when it comes to her sex drive. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking like watching her on stage, and I'll get into your answer, but just watching her on stage and being like, oh my God, we are living in such a wild time where women can get on stage and actually talk about their sex drive in an empowered way. I mean, it was just
Mhm.
wild to watch that. So I think she's a really funny example of how we're living a really exciting, strange time to be a woman where you can be fully empowered, independent, and make a lot of the same decisions men used to make for themselves, especially for those out there that are financially independent. But I want to get into the stress piece because if you are a working woman and if you're a mom, you are working hard, okay? Whether you are a mom, and there's a lot of women out here in the audience that are both moms and working women. I mean, 41% of households, the women are the primary breadwinners. And there's a record number of women I know personally that are having children without a husband. And so we are living in a really, really stressful time to be a woman because it's not just about having it all, it's about do, if you really want to have it all, you actually have to sign up for doing it all. And unfortunately, that's leading to, I think, enormous amounts of chronic stress, of which I have to say, like, I have it, I may have it, and I kind of weird way, I kind of enjoy stress because I like being productive, but
Mhm.
I do know that there are consequences to chronic stress, and I know what it's like to burn out, and I know what it's like to have relationship stress, and so chronic stress is actually really, really problematic for your hormones. It's going to create less neuroplasticity. It's going to create more mood dysfunction. It's going to create wild swings in your cortisol. It's going to actually prioritize stress hormones over sex hormone production. Your body will not prioritize fertility and reproduction if it's experiencing the equivalent of a hurricane outside.
Mhm.
So for women, you have to recognize your body has essentially two different mitochondrial settings. You have um, normal peacetime metabolism when you're ready for reproduction, you've got enough resources, you've got enough energy, and you feel fertile and you have a high libido. And then there's also the cell danger response. And this is when the cells go into a extreme response to chronic stress, chronic threat, and it actually shifts your metabolic health into an energy saving mode. So this is where you start seeing depression, you start seeing people with more chronic fatigue symptoms, you see people with chronic illnesses, chronic pain, their metabolism,
Also weight gain and
weight gain,
just,
thyroid
you know,
dysfunction,
yeah, I think
you
it shows
know?
up in a lot of ways where we probably say, oh, my metabolism feels sluggish, where
Yes,
I'm putting on weight, I have low energy, everything feels a little bit achy, I
exactly.
feel off, and you can't really identify it. But, our bodies and our cells can't tell the difference between this perceived threat and like a real threat. Like we're not being
Exactly.
chased by bears, but we're being chased by metaphorical bears, like
Right.
every,
And
right?
this is where really I do have to just say, when you're under like the worst stress of your life, that's when you need serious therapy. That's when you need somatic. I have great somatic therapists that I work with. I don't work just on a cognitive level. I think you have to work it on a physical level. And on that note, trauma is a huge driver of sexual dysfunction, and trauma is not just sexual trauma. Birth trauma is a huge driver of pelvic floor dysfunction and sexual dysfunction that I didn't even realize until I started learning about. I mean, I basically spent the last 3 years studying love and sex because I realized that this was fundamental to flourishing and fundamental to healthy relationships, having a healthy body. And so when I discovered that role of sex and love, and also, lack of sex and relationship discord or even trauma, I really started to understand how the nervous system is programmed by experience. And so when a woman is experiencing, for example, let's say you have a horrible birth trauma, massive tear in your pelvic floor, maybe you had a horrible episiotomy, maybe you couldn't
Mhm.
walk easily for a few weeks, maybe you had some challenges with actually delivering the child. That can lead to vaginismus. That can lead to dyspareunia. That can lead to pelvic pain. And that can lead to having a low desire for sex because your body is saying, I'm afraid to be penetrated there. I'm afraid of what's going to happen. That part of my body is in a state of threat. And that can happen also from sexual trauma. And so sexual trauma can rewire your entire nervous system to perceive sex as unsafe. And unfortunately, MDMA assisted therapy has not been approved by the FDA, but it is one of the only things we've found clinically that can actually help reverse PTSD. And I'm not necessarily advocating MDMA assisted therapy, but I am saying that, um, you know, for a woman who has sexual trauma, about 30% of them will develop PTSD, but around 60 to 80% of them will develop sexual dysfunction. And knowing that one in five women are raped, one in especially women in college, one in four girls are abused as children, and one in three are assaulted in their lifetime, we actually have a pretty big problem.
Yeah.
And so when we were developing the Adamo method, it was so important that we developed a trauma informed therapy. And for any women in the audience who are listening to this and maybe have a history of birth trauma or sexual trauma, or even just molestation as a child, I cannot tell you how important it is that you get proper trauma-informed care because most physicians are not trained in this. I mean, if you look at even just OBGYN appointments, the way that they kind of like just the way that they like use the speculum can be really
Oh,
like uncomfortable. So we need to create a much more tender relationship with our bodies and their pelvic floors and our physiology. And also we need to learn how it works. So I didn't get taught proper pelvic anatomy because the clitoris wasn't mapped properly by an anatomist until 2007. And
okay. Is that not the
that's
craziest thing?
wild.
And I would add to that that the clitoris, right? Or like women have just as much erectile tissue as a man.
Yes.
It's
It's
just
just inside.
redistributed. It's inside. I want to bring up something that is like I don't know if anyone has read Dr. Casperson's book, but she's an incredible urologist. It's a very big menopause expert right now, and she just came out with a book, and she talks about how the organ of pleasure for a man is the penis, and the
Yeah,
organ of pleasure for a woman is the clitoris, not necessarily the vagina, right? But it's really like an anatomy thing where the clitoris is not just a dot, right? If you can find it, yay, you used to get points for just finding that dot, right? It's
yeah,
actually like a claw. It's the erectile tissue is all redistributed inside under the vulva and the labia. And it takes a long time to be engorged. Do you want to maybe address the orgasm gap and really just talk about this idea of like engorgement and like when is a woman really actually able to feel all of this pleasure? Like it does take some time and we're not timed the same way as men.
right. I mean, it takes a woman typically 15 to 20 minutes to get fully aroused. So quickies usually, even though they might be fun for women a little bit, they're not usually the greatest of sex unless you're spontaneously aroused and a lot of women are receptively aroused. So spontaneous arousal is when you just are turned on by something that you noticed or you just become just aroused during the day. Like it's I don't actually know the exact numbers of women who are spontaneously aroused, but it's not as high as the amount of women that are receptively aroused,
Mhm.
which means receptive arousal means you have to be turned on. And a lot of men just are frankly uncomfortable with female anatomy. I mean, maybe there's certainly great lovers out there, but not everyone has.
We're actually uncomfortable with our own anatomy, right? It's like, can we take responsibility for our own
Sure,
awareness of like what feels good? Are we able to
right,
communicate that? Do we actually understand our female anatomy? And, because that's something that we have to share
right.
with our partners.
One of the things that we do teach in the Adama method is this concept of genital erotic mapping, which means that like when you really do want to get intimately connected to your pelvic floor and find out what feels good and then do that with a partner. So you getting to know your body with toys or with fingers is actually a really healthy thing. And it takes a little bit of
Mhm.
time to actually fully understand like what's going to actually get me off. So especially if you're a woman who's, been raised in a very Christian upbringing or religious upbringing of any kind, where sex was considered shameful or wrong, that you have to overcoming that is a challenge. And so having a healthy, positive, relationship to your own sexuality is the first thing that we teach in the Adamo method. And we teach a few really common core concepts that come from the work of Sayeda Desolé. And those include erotic individuation and sexual sovereignty. So I was like, what do these things mean? What are you talking about? And she's like, Molly, basically, erotic individuation means that you have your unique set of turn-ons. And those things are going to change over your time because you're going to change over time. So you need to get to
Mhm.
know your erotic self. For example, there's some women in the audience that are postpartum. You as a mother is a different erotic body and being than you as a maiden before you had a child. And so you need to there's a moment of like, how do I figure out who I am going to be as an individual woman postpartum? First and foremost, taking care of your own needs, taking care of your nutrition, taking care of your body, taking care of, I mean, so many women postpartum are depleted in terms of hormones, as well as and nutrients. So like nourishing your body, nourishing your mind, figuring out how to be gentle with yourself when you're in delicate moments of your life, especially in the moments of postpartum, for example.
And that 6 week mark of like, you should be able to like get back on the proverbial horse after 6 weeks is kind of like this made up patriarchal thing where it's like, if you've had some tears and some damage and you don't your body just went through a
It
major, I
it
mean,
can take
beautiful major
it can
trauma, it
take
can take
over
a
a
long time.
year for some women to fully feel normal again.
It feels
I had
different.
a friend who has seriously she had all of her hormones were low after she had given birth. All of
Yeah.
her hormones were low. She felt like garbage. She had gained a ton of weight, and she had to get professional care to get these hormones optimized so that she could properly function as a mother. And she looks amazing now. But I mean, honestly, like the coolest thing about what we have available now as women is we actually have really great programs and really great products that are So that have such a great capacity to shift our physiology. And we're the most informed generation of women that's ever existed when it comes to health. So even though there's a lot of challenges we may be facing with modern life, we need to look at the advantages we have because my mom had 5 kids and she certainly did not have any of her labs optimized in that process time, which is hard.
Mhm.
But again, it's so important to be gentle. And the second thing I want to also mention is like we're
And
also
that's something that,
yeah. Oh, I mean, I was just going to say we're
oh,
also one
sorry,
of
my
the
connection had a,
we're one of the first generations to actually be able to embody this concept of sexual sovereignty, which is we're starting to push up against this notion that it's okay to be mistreated in a sexual manner, right? Like the Me Too movement's been a big movement towards bodily autonomy. And look, the reality is that there are generations of men that did not get properly educated on what consent looked like and felt like. And so we are now in this position of having to educate men, educate partners, and educate ourselves on what does it mean to have what does consent mean? Because consent can be communicated verbally, but it can also be communicated in an embodied sense. So we actually teach partners in our program how to communicate their yes and their no with their bodies because a lot of people can shut down in uncomfortable circumstances and their body will go into a freeze state. And that is a state where a woman's body or a man's body is saying no. And yet, if you haven't been taught how to read that, then that's the sad thing is that a lot of sexual trauma happens in initially a consensual context. And this is
Mhm.
where I've had a lot of awakening around, wow, we have actually our work cut out for us because we're not teaching this in schools. There's only 4 states that mandate comprehensive sexual education.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that I love about what we've built at the Adama method is it is a really comprehensive sex education. It only takes 9 weeks. And you can basically go from having a pretty great, I thought I had a top-notch sex life. I was like, I am 99 percentile. And then I didn't realize until I was working on this program with these sex therapists that I had a lot of growth and I had a lot of work to do. There was things that I didn't know about what made great sex. And one of the big things that we you mentioned, Celia, is this concept of understanding one's body. And I was taught Kegels growing, when I was like reading about books and sex, and it was like I didn't really realize, and I wrote about Kegels in my book, The Spark Factor, but I didn't realize that it's just like going to the gym and lifting weights. It's important to have a strong sense of flexion when you're lifting. It's also important to actually have proper extension. Similarly, with your pelvic floor, it's important to be able to Kegel and pull up, but it's also as important, if not more important, than to know how to push out your pelvic floor. Because when we learn how to breathe in and push out our pelvic floor at the same time, what we're doing is we're actually directing energy and blood flow that generates more sensation and more lubrication in our genitals. And when you actually have this mind genital connection built, you actually have a lot more agency over, frankly, turning yourself on. And you can get lubricated faster, you can get aroused faster, you can have an orgasm. We actually demonstrated clinically that we can increase orgasm quality and orgasm frequency in women, which is apparently, I mean, there's basically 65% of women, maybe it might be 68% of women who are in a heterosexual relationship orgasm each time they have sex, whereas 95% of heterosexual males. And the numbers are generally higher.
Heterosexual males take the top prize, and then I
They
think
do.
heterosexual females, and
And then I
then,
think it's homosexual females are
what else is
next,
in
I
the
think.
middle, right? So,
And then I think it's
mhm,
homosexual males.
yeah. Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. I mean, going back to like female anatomy is like really understanding your own anatomy, being comfortable with it, loving it, right? Understanding what feels good and turns you on. But it's this idea that it does take time. I mean, even when you're talking about just, that exploration, I like to call it a treasure hunt. Like with whatever partner, heterosexual or not, like, we're talking a lot about heterosexual couples, but it's really applying to everyone. It's like, go on a treasure hunt. We have erogenous zones all over our body.
Totally.
Can we reframe what performance-based sex to pleasure-based sex?
Yes. Oh
Hey,
my
as a
God.
good
Thank you.
start point of, when you talk about blood flow, and I want to make sure everyone understands this, right? It's like blood flow is the thing that actually engorges all of your tissues and it
Yes.
literally turns all your nerve endings on. So when you take your time and you breathe, right? And when Molly's talking about like contracting your kind of pelvic floor and then pushing down, it's like we don't actually normally breathe, right? So if you're pushing
Exactly.
down, you're actually able to like really change the sensation. So I think one of the takeaways for everyone listening is slow down, play, pleasure map your body,
And also grind with your
really
clothes
under
on. Like, do
what?
not throw out the grinding with clothes on. We actually have an entire lesson on this, which is pretend like
Go
you're a
back to high
teenager
school,
on your
everyone.
first date. Pretend like you're on your first date and just make out for 15 to 20 minutes, if not an hour, and just grind like you're a teenager again. And you'll be surprised at how aroused you can get. And yeah, we just like once a person's in a committed relationship, typically they just zoom in on penetration. But a big and don't get me wrong, our method is definitively teaching penetration. So it's not like we're overlooking that. But we're trying to teach people that it's not just about that act of penetration. It's about everything that happens before you get penetrated, right? And also, as you have someone enter you with either a strap-on or penis or finger, you can learn to actually use that pelvic floor push to also pull in your partner using suction. And so instead of it being just performative to pleasure-based sex, it's also friction to suction-based sex. So using more suction and more bodily contact and using hip movements instead of just thrusting in and out with your legs, using more subtle hip movements and keeping the body connected can actually create so much more sensation in the entire vaginal canal.
It
Which,
also
by the
makes
way, is where,
women
yeah,
more of an active participant
more of an
in
active receiver.
yeah, an active receiver, you know, and I think that that's something that is specific to what you're teaching in partnered sex. It's just that we think of foreplay maybe as being like, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this. And then
Yeah,
actually, when you get to intercourse, you're kind of like, you know, maybe you're in charge once in a while, but it's not, it's actually both parties that are actively receiving and giving at the same time. And again, it's like a reframe of maybe how we've been taught or not taught how to have
yeah.
sex.
I mean, we weren't taught how to have sex. And so what most people are watching is porn. And what most porn is showing is performative based friction sex. And that's part of the reason why there's such a huge pleasure gap. And I
Mhm.
think part of the reason why it's actually interesting, more women tend to be the biggest watchers of lesbian porn. And part of that, I think, is because you tend to see actually women in an actual state of orgasm versus what we typically see women doing in typical heterosexual based porn is almost all of it is as a performance.
Mhm.
And honestly, like that was my 20s. It was like, I'm just gonna be good at sex, which is I learned it from porn. If I just act like they do, I'm gonna be good at sex. And unfortunately, I had shitty sex in my 20s. It didn't feel good. It was painful. I didn't enjoy it. I never came. And I really feel like I missed out on what could have been
Mhm.
great experiences because I thought that's what sex looked like. And what I think, is really fascinating is I'm having better, I mean, I think women actually have much later sexual peaks than men. And so, I'm having better sex now at 40 than I did at any other time in my life, which is
I mean,
pretty
I am, and I'm
amazing.
50.
And that's
So,
incredible, right? And that's the thing, Celia. Like, I think the thing that women in the audience need to hear is that sex can get better and better and better. And I do recommend reading the book Magnificent Sex by Peggy Kleinplatz because Magnificent Sex is not this performative based act. It's an act of deep connection and union with someone where you completely lose yourself in the experience of connection. And to get to that place, you have to throw out all these stupid scripts that you've been taught of what sex looks like and feels like. And you actually need to focus on embodiment. And that's a key topic of what we teach in our method is embodiment and human connection. Because if you can get into a state of rhythmic entrainment and rhythmic connection with your partner, um, it becomes less about the orgasm. It becomes far more about the experience, and the entire experience can be orgasmic.
yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point is that we, as a culture, I think, are very goal oriented. And I
Mhm.
think the minute you start sprinting towards that orgasm, it actually will show that you're hyper focused on it. You're missing out on the journey. Like it's meant to be fun. Take a long, meandering road to get there. You're going to be amazed kind of what you figure out and what you find. And it's funny and it's messy and it's not perfect. And it's really a full experience that you can have with whatever partner or yourself, you know? And I think that playfulness is what gets taken out of it. It's just like, I'm going to go from A to B. And I mean, I guess it's different depending on how you're wired. I think some people are more oriented towards, you know, if you've done your erotic blueprint, you know, some people are just more predictable in terms of how they can kind of, you know, reach the end, which is more of a straight
Sure.
shot. And some
I mean,
people are much more sensual. Some people love
right.
anticipation. Like it changes for everybody.
Well, so speaking of the erotic blueprint, I was talking to Jaya's partner at the sexological conference, and I can't remember his name, but he's wonderful. He's actually in the Goop documentary. And, we were discussing how you may have an erotic blueprint of, and by the way, for people out there who don't know what the erotic blueprint is, there's energetic, energetic, sensual, sexual, kink, and shapeshifter. And so the first four, I would say it's not just an erotic blueprint, it's also a sexual blueprint because energetic is the least amount of touch and the most amount of teasing. Like I had an energetic partner and I had to stand like 10 feet away from him in the room and turn him on from there. Like that's how much he was energetic. Then there's sensual, which I tend to be more sensual, which is I get turned on by smell, taste, touch, music, the mood. Like I want to be in my all of my
And you can
senses.
be turned off. Like if I hear, I'm the same. Like if I
Oh
hear
my
a
God,
song
there's a
that I
weird
don't like,
sound,
I'll
like a
stop
siren or
and change
something.
the music. Yeah.
Yeah. And over time, I do recommend wearing socks when you have sex as a woman because if you get cold, that can be a problem. But then sexual, I had this one guy that I dated, and he just wanted to have sex. That's it, just want to have sex. And I was like, can we just at least have some foreplay here? Um, and then there's kink, which is tends to be the most intense sexual contact. It tends to be the most power plays. It can be psychological, it can be physical kink. There's even emotion, psychological, physical, emotional kink. But then there's the shapeshifter, which I tend to be more of a shapeshifter. It's you're going in between all of these. You can actually find all of them arousing. But similar to love languages, it's important to actually know your type and also know your partner's type so that you can actually serve them better. There was a presentation at this phenomenal conference I went to. This Tony Robbins has a relationship seminar he runs. And I went to it, and he had a teacher teaching how to give a blowjob with all the different types of the erotic blueprints. And I was just like, oh my God, I did not know any of these things. And so you can learn how to incorporate these blueprints into these different sexual experiences. But then the last thing I'll say is that your sexual erotic type can shift with a partner. So you might have a partner who teaches you how to get off on more of an energetic way, or teaches you or gets you it makes you realize you actually like certain kinks. And so the beauty of what I really believe is a fundamental part of sexual health is you have to understand yourself first. You have to figure out your turn-ons. You have to figure out your likes and your dislikes. You have to figure out who are you erotically now in this moment of your life, and what are the conditions that you can create to make sure that you can incorporate a healthy sex life into your lifestyle. So one of the things that I learned from these sex therapists I work with is that we don't treat sex like we do our sleep management, our supplements we take, our food that we manage, our exercise
Mhm.
routines. We're not optimizing sex the same way we're optimizing nutrition, fitness, and sleep. We are looking at it as this whole thing that's in this black box. And it's like, oh, it's like, that's the thing you hide in the drawer in the closet.
And we're
But
supposed to know what to do.
but I mean, if you are in a committed relationship, and you have access to a partner that you can have sex with on a really regular basis, that's actually an opportunity for you to create honestly, a healthy sexual routine. And I don't think you should look at it like a chore. I think you should look at it like if I nurture this part of my relationship's going to flourish. And sex is a fundamental part of what makes a romantic relationship different than our platonic relationships. It's a fundamental facet of existence. And in terms of understanding love, um, consummate love is considered to be passion, commitment, and intimacy. So mostly speaking to emotional intimacy. And passion,
Mhm.
if you have just intimacy and commitment, you have companion love, which a lot of people kind of evolve into. But I believe, and we actually were able to demonstrate that we could increase feelings of passion by 11% in people who are committed couples, people who've been together for many years. And I was like, wow, like we actually were able to demonstrate improvements in intimacy and passion. I mean, how much different would the world look if marriages had 11% increase in passion? Like it would
Wow.
be a different existence for people. So I believe that anything that you work on can be improved. If you're going to go upgrade your house, you're going to get the necessary supplies and commit the necessary time and energy in your schedule to make the upgrade. Similar to
Yeah.
sexuality, everybody wants a quick fix. But my biggest paradigm shifts in my sexuality did not come from like a single thing. It came from concerted effort over time to care about this part of my life. And I mean, I think I care about it more than the average person because I basically realized that divorces are highly linked to two main things. One is money and the other is sex. And if you don't early on in your relationship tackle healthy financial use of funds for you and your partner, and even if you're not in a relationship, having financial wellness is a huge part of longevity. It's actually the number one factor in longevity is your finances. And so
Yeah.
I look at financial wellness, I look at sexual wellness as things that I need to master because that's because what that will make or break my health long term with both my
And that's
partner
a
and me.
And that's that. And you're really talking about an investment, not just the kind of instant gratification. So taking steps to improve your sex life and your overall health today, obviously, is going to reap some amazing benefits. But it's just like investing in your 401k, right? Like you also
Yeah.
want that long-term investment of, and when you talk about longevity, it's proven that human touch, connection, intimacy, these it's an important driver of longevity. Can you
It's
talk a
also
little bit
a
about
barometer
that
of
from,
relationships. Yeah, I mean, I want to just speak to this because
yeah.
bad sex or no sex can certainly tank a relationship, but typically bad sex or no sex is a symptom of a relationship problem. It's not always the cause. Um, you have to, I mean, I would actually look at your sex life with your partner as an important barometer of your connection. And I don't want to make women out there to think that there's like, because here's the thing, there's actual real research on women and their relationships and how when a woman has children, the amount of energetic resources that have to be committed to keeping that child alive will inevitably play some role in affecting her relationship with her partner, unless she is aware of this problem. This is not necessarily has to be a problem. It's just more of like you have to recognize you only have so much energy to spend. And so where are you
Mhm.
going to direct that energy, right? You've got to feed yourself, feed your family, take care of your body, take care of your children. And that takes a lot of energetic resources. And this is where I go back to how important it is to master your metabolism and have a healthy metabolism, to have healthy, ample energy to tackle everything in your life. Because you're gonna like, I know I don't have kids yet, but I was raised with four sisters and I kind of helped in some ways raise them. I know what it's like to actually have a lot of responsibilities. I have three companies, and it's really hard work for women to figure out how to bake this into their existence. But I think I think sex can be a huge stress reliever, but it
Mhm.
typically you have to enjoy it. And so if
Yeah.
you're not enjoying your sex life, there's things that you can do to make it better. And that's what we did at Adamo is we created an evidence-based program that actually has real outcomes on sexual function. And we basically the biggest thing we saw shift was sexual satisfaction. We also saw improvements in sexual communication, sexual confidence, reductions in sexual shame. And we really wanted to demonstrate that this is a way that you can actually just by watching videos and doing some practices can actually in 9 weeks make a big difference in your sex life.
I mean, that's incredible. I
And
want to
that, by
just
the way,
make
this is
sure that we
independent of
have,
hormones.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we've covered kind of hormones and really kind of starting with identifying some like maybe some physical issues and then going to like the more mental and emotional things that we should address that become barriers to our pleasure. I want to see if there's any questions. Or, I mean, we can obviously keep talking, but there are, besides Molly's 9 week Adamo method program, which I think Riley will send out a follow up email so that everyone has a link to that in case they want to learn more about that or join a future cohort. But, we really want, and also Joy has products that, we love that there is an incredible topical called exclamation point. Hint, hint, Riley, Molly and I might need them. If we have any questions, that anyone wants to, okay, here we have one. Riley, do you want to?
Here, I'll read them out loud. Yeah, I actually have one from the Q&A box that someone used. So Sarah asked, question about cortisol. Dr. Molly mentioned a couple of times that cortisol levels are down. I would think with all of the extra stress, cortisol would be up. So why down
Yeah.
and how does that impact us?
Okay, so in general, your body has feedback systems. So when you're in the beginnings of major stress, when you're feeling tired and wired, you actually have a bit more energy because you have a high cortisol state. This is the sort of immediate alarm phase, right? Your body's under high stress. And then over time, when you've had high cortisol levels for many, many months through chronic stress, the brain gets negative feedback from that cortisol. And it starts to, your brain actually gets so much cortisol that it says, I'm going to start down regulating the production of cortisol. And so that's when you start seeing the cortisol curve flatline. And that's when someone's on their road to burnout. And that's when their hormones tend to be low. Their blood sugar tends to be low at night. They get really, really low drops in their CGM. They can't maintain their blood sugar because they don't have enough glucocorticoid. Typically, when women are high cortisol early in the alarm phase, they tend to have higher blood sugar and they tend to have, regardless of what they eat, they seem to have higher blood sugar. So cortisol is has an intimate relationship with blood sugar because it has a role in regulating blood sugar.
Very good answer. Thank you, Dr. Molly. We do have another one. This is a very good one. I think a lot of us can relate in a heterosexual relationship. What do you recommend for women who have experienced pain or discomfort during sex with partners who are larger than they are used to, and how to overcome the psychosomatic anxiety?
So the beauty of our bodies is we have these amazing, I mean, look, we have the most incredible, I mean, if you just think about it, guys, people can push a baby out of their bodies. This is mind-boggling, right? So the thing that happens when a woman's about to give birth is her body is given different hormones and her body is given lots of oxytocin. That oxytocin loosens up and relaxes the tissues. So very importantly, if you have a partner with that is a large member, you need more foreplay than the average woman. You need to be fully engorged, fully aroused, fully prepared for entry. And typically, if you are not fully engorged, fully aroused, fully lubricated, you can experience some pain. And that can be a major issue. Now, if you have what's called vaginismus, which means your body literally clamps up, that's a different story. In some cases, there are cases where women have extra tight vaginas, just like women can have extra tight buttholes. Like, I hate to say it out loud, but it's true. So in cases of women who have extra tight tissues, you really do want to see a pelvic floor specialist to get an assessment if you have some hypertonicity. But you also want to talk to a pelvic floor specialist about dilators. For any woman who this I can have the same conversation with any woman out there who's afraid of anal sex, which is if you're about to have something penetrate you that feels bigger than it should going into your body, you absolutely must have proper preparation before penetration. And this means lots of oral sex, lots of manual stimulation, lots of lubrication. It's not just about having more lube. It's about, although lube is important, it's about learning
Yes,
how to
lube,
make,
everyone. For those people who are not like the back of the room, lube always will make
yeah.
everything better
And
for
also finding
everything.
the right kind of lube for your body. There's a lot of problems with lubes out there where they have weird chemicals that can be very irritating to the body. You should not be using coconut oil as lube. You want to be using ideally a water-based product that provides you with a sense. It really shouldn't irritate you at all. And so one of the things about suction that's really important is you can actually create suction during oral sex too. And it's one of the biggest secrets to great oral sex is using more suction. So having your partner, making sure your partner gives you, I mean, ideally, if you don't like oral sex, I'll totally understand that. But making sure that you're using one or two fingers first before a penis and really just feeling fully relaxed in your body. Um, before you have penetration. And also, ideally, you should be the one guiding the partner into your body. It should feel like you are the one in control, similar to vaginal or anal sex. There's a great book, I think it's called Butt Seriously. It's about this phenomenal doctor who all he deals with is butts. And whether you have a tight vagina or a big member, a partner with a big member, you do need to recognize that it's going to take some time for those tissues to relax. And specifically for women who have who want to experience anal sex painlessly, if you are the one guiding the partner into your body, you're going to feel a lot more control and a lot less fear than you would feel if you're being penetrated. So we teach this entire process in our method so that, I mean, honestly, I would highly recommend signing up for the Adamo method. And I'm not just trying to sell it. I actually think we've solved this problem.
That's really beautiful. I'm going to link that in the chat too. I put Celia's Instagram and Dr. Molly, so make sure you
Cool.
follow them because they're both,
Yeah, and feel free to send me any personal messages as well.
yeah, this was amazing. Should I ask one more question from the group or should we do a little wrap up?
I mean, let's do the last one on and regular touch and intimacy.
Yes. Okay. So, how does regular physical touch, intimacy, and an active sexual life contribute to overall health and longevity?
I love this one.
Yeah, so I spent so much time studying oxytocin neurobiology, and I was like taught by this amazing woman, Sue Carter, whose husband is Stephen Porges, who invented polyvagal theory. So he studies stress, and she studies human love and attachment. And she taught me the role of oxytocin in human love and longevity. And basically, what I discovered was that oxytocin is released when we give birth, it's released at orgasm, it's released with human touch, when you touch an animal, when you hold hands with a partner, when you get a hug from someone, when you're raising a child and you're cuddling someone. Um, you know, human touch and even animal, like just petting an animal, can release oxytocin. It is the bonding hormone. And what's cool about oxytocin is that it is also the hormone of basically what it does is it protects the heart. It's cardioprotective, it's mitoprotective, it protects the mitochondria. It reduces inflammation, it reduces oxidative stress. So it literally helps your metabolism function better. What I discovered is that basically when you are alone and isolated as a human, your brain is going to be on a natural state of hypervigilance because it's designed to do that. Because in primitive times, if you were on the outskirts of a community that you lived in, you were more prone to becoming a target for a neighboring tribe that could be attacking or an animal attacking you. So we developed the evolutionary connection. We've developed evolutionary connection on a neurobiological level for a reason. It's designed like we're meant to feel loneliness as a hunger signal that's designed to bring you closer to people. And one of the sad things is that most of us that are single are living alone. And so we're living in a more hypervigilant state. And that's why it's so important to maintain a strong community around you of people that you love and trust. I do recommend getting massage if you don't have a partner because you do need human touch for health. And oxytocin is one of the greatest pathways to longevity because the stronger your relationships, the greater the longer your life is going to be and the greater quality of your life is going to be. So when I discovered all this, I was like, oh my God, I need to build a company around this because we need to tackle human connection at scale because it's something that is so fundamental and yet it's so screwed up. And now we're seeing people falling in love with AI instead of humans because they
Yeah.
can't find partners because they're isolated and alone and stuck to their phones. And this is a crisis for young people in particular. And so I do recommend that if you have kids or you are single on your own, that you really make an effort to educate yourself and others on the role of human connection in health and longevity.
I think this is a great place to wrap it up. I love that message. So the takeaway, reach out and touch someone or yourself for all the good, feel good chemicals and for your health and longevity. Riley, thank you to Joy for always like hosting such fun conversation. I mean, who gets to wake up in the morning, first thing, roll out of bed and have this like, spicy conversation with one of your best friends? So, thank you, Molly, for joining us this morning. And hopefully this was a fun and informative conversation for everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll send a follow-up email probably on Monday. So thanks for everyone for joining and to the beautiful Dr. Molly and Celia for leading this honestly wonderful conversation. So thank you both.
Thanks, Riley. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, guys.